Welcome to Almost Got It podcast, where we cover the latest breaking news around consciousness, transhumanism, AI, and tech. And we attempt to answer the question, what in the hell does all this mean? So this week, we will be covering brain-to-voice technology, microplastics in the brain, a musician brought back to life after his death by generating new neurons that make music, and speaking with dolphins, along with fun other topics. And disclaimers as usual, you have Dylan Dane here with me, who's engineer, entrepreneur, MIT, ex-Google, XYZ, a burner, a Sri Lankan, a husband, a cat father, and a philosophizer.
Current ChatGPT, too much philosophizer. And Ben is also a computer scientist with an exit to Google, CEO of the famed Esalen Institute, and have spent decades as an executive coach and a CEO coach, and also a beloved father. And make sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and everywhere else, and give us feedback on how we can do better. For the first story this week, Ben, we have an exciting, yet another development in brain-computer interfaces. We have a paralyzed woman who was able to talk in real time using a brain-to-voice interface, where the woman was just thinking what she wanted to speak, and a decoder was decoding it. And what's remarkable about this is that they broke the previous record. In fact, shattered it. It was like a 3x improvement in words per minute, over 90 words per minute that this system can decode. And what this means is that someone who is, really in a super unfortunate state, like being paralyzed and not be able to communicate with the world, now can finally have an almost real-time conversation. I think that's incredible.
Yeah. I think it's amazing. And before we jump into this, I wrote some headlines for some of our topics today. So we're going to start with some un-PC headlines you have for something un-PC.
All right,
Dylan?
What's the headline for our story about this paralyzed woman?
Yeah, this is my best SNL Weekend Update impression here. So we'll give it a shot. A paralyzed woman got her voice back through a brain implant. Imagine losing arguments again after years of peaceful silence. Talk about mixed blessings.
Oh my
God.
God.
Supposed to laugh.
That's so bad. That's so bad.
That's pretty good.
Did AI come up with that? I feel like it's almost like, I'm surprised that they didn't zap that type of joke.
I can neither confirm nor deny that, Dylan.
Oh my God, terrible.
So to me, there's this general thrust towards technology being able to reproduce lost abilities, ability to speak, ability to move, things like that I think is really, really exciting. And to me, one of the things that you and I, as product and tech builders, we look for are magic moments, right? These moments where technology can do something that seems impossible here. And to me, one of the things that's incredible is when I think about how familiar we all are with that electronic voice that has become synonymous with Stephen Hawking. The idea that we can create this magic moment where someone gets their voice back, where they're speaking just as if this woman is speaking as if she had never lost her voice, and it sounds like her. How humanizing that is, and how incredible. So to me, this advancement is tremendously exciting, and the magic moments that it's going to create for millions of people is just extraordinary.
Yeah, it's true. And there's so many ways to, so many subtle ways that this is important, right? And that little leap, those really microsecond, millisecond improvements that you make in this technology has an outsized impact on how real it feels, and crossing that uncanny valley of kind of merging technology with like real human interactions, right? And even in this particular case, they noticed that her anxiety about using this interface dropped dramatically, more than 50%, I think, because the voice felt more natural and real time to her, right? And which was obviously more freeing for her to use to communicate with the world. And and then there's almost, at some level this could even become superhuman. Obviously, I mean, this is like a huge leap, but at some point you could forego the translation completely and communicate directly with someone else, which is also wild.
Yeah, well, let me jump in on this. To me, there's two things that I was really excited to bring into our conversation today around this. One is what you're speaking to, and there's this theme that is in the media, right, of sort of humans being replaced by AI, and the notion that some of our humanness is being lost. And what I find so exciting here with tech is that there's also this opportunity to regain our humanness, or to become more human in certain ways. And we've talked about some examples of this a few weeks ago. For example, kids being able to spend less time studying and more time being social while still performing higher on tests. So I love the idea of this woman's anxiety dropping, her true voice coming forward again, and the opportunities that creates for her to connect with other humans.
Right.
So I just think that thematically is really interesting. And secondly, that the point that you bring up about dropping sort of the formality of actually speaking, I went right to that, right? Telepathy is sort of there, right? If we all get to the point where we have a brain implant, it's like, oh, great, we'll use Bluetooth and communicate thoughts directly. Now that raises a whole host of fascinating issues, but I want to talk about that. What do you think are the implications of a world where we all have this sort of implant and we're all sort of hooked up to the internet?
And so one story that comes to mind immediately is this guy Nolan, who was the first recipient of a Neuralink implant, and he did a series of long interviews with Lex Friedman. He did like something like 6 hours of interviews with the whole team, and there's so many remarkable details in this whole story, right? But the bit that really stuck in my mind is that the guy's a video gamer, and he likes playing video games, and this is something that he does all day long. He uses the Neuralink implant to play video games, right? And he described playing video games in a way that no one has ever described in my experience, which is that he was saying that when you play the video game with Neuralink, it almost feels like things that he wants to happen before he even decides those things should happen, right? Essentially, he's almost like observing himself playing the game. So what's happening here is that usually there is a significant latency added when you control your video game controller or whatever with your hands, right? And I forgot how many milliseconds that is, but it's a significant number. But then when you're using something like Neuralink, where you're communicating directly, what's happening is that you can really act at the speed of thought, or even speed of intention, and from countless studies we know that you make a decision before you're aware that you made that decision, right? And so what's remarkable is that essentially when you're playing a video game, you're making a series of decisions. You're like almost observing yourself playing the game at that point, because your brain, is subconsciously making the decisions. So that is remarkable. It's a remarkable experience, and one of my predictions, honestly, is that likely even this year, I think we will have the first superhuman ability bestowed on someone because of because of these types of implants. And it will likely be something like playing video games, where a BCI wearer will beat all possible human contenders on some metric.
I mean, I'm trying to pull up the name of this, but there's a study about this where it takes about 200 milliseconds of conscious thought to make a decision, right? So neuroscientists do this study where they have you choose between a red deck and a black deck of cards to sort of make a decision about some betting game. And what's interesting about it is the part of your brain that responds as if responds to you making the right decision and the wrong decision triggers at 7 milliseconds. And yet the conscious decision about which deck you're even choosing doesn't happen until 200. And so there's this weird sort of paradox. Right. They don't actually know how to explain. And that sort of implies that, that the decision is the rightness of the decision is known before you make it and known before you even turn the card over. And they don't have an answer for this. And so I think it's entirely possible that what you're saying is correct, that you're going to have this experience of just sort of witnessing yourself play something and it's seeming to happen before you truly make the decision.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely see why something like that is useful in a kind of like context like a video game, right? Where you're performing a series of repetitive, not necessarily all repetitive, but like relatively repetitive actions, and you're kind of like competing against a certain goal. But I'm curious if that type of communication will also help people sort of think faster, communicate faster, or be more efficient. It's a kind of almost like a philosophical debate. I think we'll find out. My guess is that it wouldn't, because ultimately decision making is really much more about kind of processing information contextually and like kind of thinking about it rather than communicating faster. But who knows? That's really interesting. And so
let me challenge that for a moment, right? So in prior episodes, you and I have talked a bit about the notion of sort of extending your brain, right? Like what happens if you added another brain? And if you and I decided to link our brains together to some degree, right? Open up and we do right now, but the mechanism for transferring information between your brain and mine requires speech, right?
Yeah.
Either
that's verbal... actually a really good point that you brought up. A lot of people don't think about. Language is the API for the brain, right?
Yes.
And which is fucking cool. Yeah.
And just for listeners who don't know what an API is, what's an API?
Application programming interface. That doesn't necessarily help anyone. I guess it's really a way for computers to talk to each other. You basically define a protocol. You say, structure your information this way so that I understand what you're saying, right? And so that's right. Exactly what it is.
Right. And language is essentially a very rich API, yeah. Right? My API is English, right? If you speak to me in French or German, right? I don't accept that. I don't have that API. It doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, to me, this opens up so many crazy possibilities, right? I mean, there could be sort of like espionage type of craziness where you and I could set up the permissions on our Neuralinks so that for the next hour, you and I can communicate directly non-verbally, right? Like you could hear my thoughts, and then you and I could go into a meeting together. And we never need to even look at each other. We just know what we're thinking and can communicate with each other while engaging with someone else, right? Or you could turn it on for an entire basketball team or a set of musicians or things like that. So to me, it opens up this amazing, weird, and wonderful world for what does it even mean to be human or to be conscious.
To your point, one thing I'm excited for actually is a more subtle take on this, where, and I've observed this, right? So I have kind of thinking about my own cognition and how it works. I have pretty good analytical skills, whereas my memory is fairly average, at least compared to some of my friends who have like almost photographic memory. And the implication of this is that I'm thinking about something and I get stuck, in the sense that I don't know that fact or figure that I read at some point for sure, but like I have to now go look it up, right? And then of course I can pull my phone and look up and all this stuff, but it's a lot of latency. But wouldn't it be great that those facts can kind of appear, somewhere in my brain or in my vision, ideally without me even having to ask for it? And that bit is what's important, right? Like, so the way thoughts appear in your cognition, like you don't really request thoughts, they just like appear as they're relevant, right? So what if there was a mechanism? And again, this should be entirely possible, because just like Nolan is playing video games before he even realizes he's playing it, right? What if the Neuralink or whatever the BCI can essentially predict what information I might need given the context of a thought that I'm line of thought that I'm following, and that context appears in front of me when I need it almost automatically, right? And this should be possible with existing technology, and that's fucking wild.
So two things on this. One, yes, right? And this is how memory works, right? So they've done studies where essentially if I seed your mind with a topic, right? Like let's say I say C, your brain immediately pulls into available sort of recent memory or almost available things related to the word C. So, and they test this because they'll show you an image, or they'll say a word like this, and then they'll see how quickly when they flash an image of something related, you recall that. So
yes.
Things like sea, salt, right? Ocean, beach, all of those things, you're able to recognize them much, much faster than if I had said something unrelated like tree, right? And so your brain's already doing this. And what you're talking about, I think, is just enhancing the capability of doing this. Now, I'm already doing this directly. I've been doing this for years with Google search, with Notepad clients like Evernote or Google Docs, right? I view my working memory as being structured differently than it was in the age before computers.
Yeah.
Most of my memory is reference pointers, essentially saying like, where can I go get that information, either on the internet or out of my documents, or now with ChatGPT, I do a lot of this. And what you're saying is just like, let's get rid of the slow part and just have the information appear directly in the mind. And I think that, that would just, it'd be incredible. It'll accelerate our experience of being human, because all of the world's knowledge will be contained in our brain, available every moment.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And one other different take I have on this story, Ben, is that something I observed, about technology in general and science very early is that it's almost it essentially acts as a liberator from certain mysteries that you were otherwise destined to put up with, right? And it starts with, like, I don't know, if you have crooked teeth, now you don't have to have crooked teeth anymore, right? You can get like a Invisalign or whatever, right? If you're you don't have to be bald, like you can get a hair transplant. There's like so much that that goes beyond like this. Like, you don't have to be hungry because there's food production, but it's not just that, right? Like things that people used to take as just fate, and technology is essentially and overrides fate, right? And this is like this kind of godlike power that it has, both awesome and scary to some people. And this instance is another overriding of fate, essentially, right? Like someone becoming a paraplegic, quadriplegic is like one of the most horrible things that can happen to a conscious being. And I think the worst case scenario here is it's almost like a nightmare for a lot of people. What if you lose your ability to move any muscles in your body, and then you're stuck? Your consciousness that's stuck inside a body, then you can, like, you have zero ways of communicating, right? at least a lot of these people can move like one little tiny little muscle, even if you don't have that, right? It's just like a permanent hell, almost like that story of Monte Cristo, where Monte Cristo was, put in the prison with a metal helmet that he cannot communicate, and this happens to people when they lose the ability to communicate. But then technology in this case, yet again, is liberating consciousness from that hell. So that is just beautiful.
Well, and to me, that was one of my first thoughts, right? So this past weekend, I had the opportunity after 5 or 6 years to spend time with one of my dear friends, Christopher, and he is a quadriplegic, right? I mean, he had a diving accident in his early 20s. Has spent 20 years in a wheelchair. He can move one muscle in his wrist, a little bit of his bicep, but he can't use his fingers. And he's an engineer, right? His whole life was about building stuff and creating. And he's worked around it. He has incredible spirit, right? And yet, I mean, he's got two beautiful daughters, and like the idea that he could get up and play with them, right? Like he could just like chase them in a park or something. It was such an inspiring idea that could be truly possible. Because literally, there's a break in his neck, right? And probably those nerves are like a millimeter apart,
Right?
Like 1 millimeter difference, and he could be having a full, rich human life, and there's that tiny break, and we don't know how to repair it, but we could send signals around, and he could be walking, and the promise here is just extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so inspiring. All right. On that note, should we go on to our second story?
I do.
Yeah.
Wait, before we go on to the second story, I was thinking about, if you and I ever hooked up directly, probably the first thought you would have was, I wonder where I can get some rotisserie chicken. That's my prediction, right?
Yeah. No, possible.
Yeah. All right. Please continue.
Yeah. So the second story, I usually often talk about the really exciting things that are happening in the world because of technological growth and industrial growth. But the second story is actually a more concerning one, and one that I'm not sure what to do about it, honestly. So basically, people have been kind of hearing this on the news a lot, probably. There was a study a few weeks ago that came out that showed that in brain samples that they analyzed in 2024, they found a very large quantity of microplastics, right? And what's really shocking about this study is that compared to similar samples taken from brains in 2016, which is just about less than 10 years ago, 2024 brain samples have 50% more microplastics than 2016, which means this is an exponentially growing threat. And what's crazy is that there is an entire plastic spoon size worth of microplastics in the average brain. I can barely wrap my head around that. Got that?
But if you just warm your head up gently to temperature, you can use the plastic to just gently wrap it around.
But yeah, this is actually pretty wild, right? And of course, microplastics have shown to increase dementia risk. People with dementia seem to have 3 to 10 times the microplastics as healthy brains. And then there are all kinds of other risks like anxiety, depression, to memory loss, to schizophrenia, and so on. And
I mean, we just don't even know, right? I mean, that's the thing, right? When we look at things like medical science, what we know is limited by two things: the questions that we ask and what we can measure.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a lot of questions that haven't been even asked. And there's a lot of things that's unclear that we can even measure, right? So is this related to a rise in autism and neurodivergence, right? Is this related to, there seems to be correlation to things like dementia. I don't know if did they get to causation or just a correlation on that?
It seemed like causation in this case, but
Okay.
but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Great. So to me, there's a bunch of things, and one, I mean, we cannot underweight the importance of the fact that this is exponentially compounding, right? Like if it was like, okay, there's this much in our brain, and then 8 years later it's about the same, that's fine. But if it's compounding, this is a clear and present threat,
right,
to us.
Yeah.
And it's unclear how that's happening, right? Because my first thought is that went to that the exponential nature of this had some relationship to there being more plastic in my life in general, and that sort of reducing that could get rid of it. But the study went on to talk about how one of their theories is that the primary source is through food, and in particular through meat, because it starts to accumulate in the food chain, just like many things, right? Like mercury. There's low amounts of it in the ocean. Tiny creatures consume that or have it in their body, and then those get eaten by larger and larger creatures. And by the time you're up to eating a tuna, the tuna then has a very high amount of mercury in it. So the theory is something very similar is happening with microplastics that leads to unreasonably high proportion in meat. And it would be unclear to me how to reverse that on a timetable that would be meaningful to us or our kids.
Yeah, no, that is a really valid point. So I think it's worth double clicking on kind of like the larger story here. First of all, plastics have been, tend to get demonized these days a lot on the news and whatnot, but it's been one of the most important and positive inventions in the history of mankind. And I think the synthetic plastics were first invented around like early 1900s or late 1800s, and then we've found so many use cases for it that has dramatically improved human life. And one of the most common, most useful use case of plastic is actually in medical sciences, medicine, right? So now we can have like things like disposable syringes, for example, that saves lives, right? And then all kinds of like plastic barriers to separate unhealthy situations when you're treating a patient and whatnot. And then there's of course economic impact. It's a multi-hundred billion dollar industry. Technology and communication and computers and cars and infrastructure, construction, and clothing, right? Like clothing used to be really expensive, and because of things like polyester, it's become a lot cheaper and a lot more accessible. And finally, even in food, plastics have played a massively positive role, because food packaging has allowed us to preserve food for a lot longer. And the world hunger was a real problem not just decades ago, and that's not a real problem today, partially because we're able to preserve food for longer, and plastics play a big role in that. But then what's also happening is that all these plastics that we're producing, they degrade, and they break down into micro and nanoplastics, and up to 200 nanometers in size, which is the size of a virus, which is so tiny and small, and it's everywhere in the environment. It's part of our ecology at this point, and which is why it is such a big problem. Like typically you say, like vitamin D deficiency is a problem. What's the solution? Go out in the sun, right? Or like, I don't know, processed meats is a problem. Go eat some unprocessed meats. That solves the problem. With this issue, exactly like you're pointing out, there's this feed forward cycle. Essentially, all these plastics that are being added to the environment are being fed to our own food, including meat, but also vegetables. And because plants absorb plastics through soil and water, and then it all accumulates in the food system, and meat, fish, and plants alike. And the concentration, obviously, food is eating food, right? And what that means is that the concentration is exponentially increasing. And that is what's really disturbing and scary about this story. That we're at the point where the average brain has 7 grams of plastics, again, the size of a plastic spoon, and that is 50% higher than 2016. That is just insane.
Well, I mean, the good news is that now we have an explanation for TikTok. No,
too much garbage in people's heads.
Right. Scientists now understand the inexplicable desire. No, well, okay. So to me, one of the more fascinating parallels here was actually this huge fight, through the 70s, more than a decade long, over leaded versus unleaded gas. Right. I mean, we sort of all see unleaded gas at the station, and probably many of us have no idea, like, why is it there? Right. And lead used to be this additive that they put into all gas everywhere. And the reason why soft metal would in the gas would go into the cylinder and would just make the engine burn better. Right. And at the time, we didn't have a technological solution for getting rid of it, right? And so right. the car industries and the gas industries were complicit in keeping this in there, even though we now know today that lead is really toxic for us, for children. It used to be in paint, things like that. We need to get it out of there. But what was fascinating is that even though it was so toxic, we couldn't determine that it was toxic because it was so ubiquitous. We couldn't do a study with an effective control group. Like, literally, lead was blanketing every part of inhabited land everywhere. So everyone from children to adults was being poisoned with lead. Now, what's interesting, this had one source and one thing. It was gas. Right. And so it took a decade to figure this out. And then we did make a technological increase to remove lead from gas. And so in that way, it's parallel. But here, plastics are so fundamental to our lives, as you said. They're in everything. They make cars work better and with a million small pieces. They make computers work. They make our homes work. Right. Like, if we removed plastic from everything today, it was a snap of our fingers, our entire life would collapse. We wouldn't even be on the internet, right? So there is not an obvious, solution of like in the lead gas thing. Like, all we had to do was figure out how to make motors better, one thing better. This solution is not at all obvious to me. And so to me, the question is, like, what can we do, right? And that's what I would ask you, Dylan. What are you going to do differently here with this
I
big
did
brain of
spend
yours?
quite a bit of time trying to figure out what I should do differently about my own lifestyle. And I care about my health and well-being, and try to go to pretty extensive levels to protect it. But I just couldn't figure this one out. And like you're saying, it's in everything, and it's not like you can eat organic food and expect the concentration of microplastics to be that much less. And of course, there are like some basic things you can do for sure, right? I'll outline the basic things. Shellfish is where shellfish tend to have 5 to 10 times more microplastics, even more sometimes, compared to regular fish, for example, or meat, because, like you were saying, the small fish and shellfish tend to accumulate the plastics, and because they're bottom feeders and all these things. And so I would avoid that, eating that. I think there's a pretty strong case to install a water filter in your home, and specifically a reverse osmosis water filter, because these things can filter out any microplastics and particles down to like 1 micron level in some cases. So I think that's a pretty strong, pretty easy thing to do. Beyond that, though, I don't like. I mean, you could move, like, you'd grow your own food and eat it. That would probably help. But aside from that, and even then, it's not going to eliminate the problem. It's just going to reduce the severity of the problem.
Well, let me add two or three other things. So one is, to me, there's the bottom of the food chain with the bottom feeders, right? So shellfish and reducing or cutting those out. But then there's also the top of the food chain, right? Because all those microplastics, you know, the little fish get consumed by bigger ones, up and up and up, and so you're concentrating it. And so probably a lot of the larger fish also have high densities of microplastics. So it'd be like, if you're going to eat fish, eat not the smallest bottom feeders, but small to medium sized fish. Then there's also the concentration in meat that they're talking about. Cows.
Well, yeah. So that one, I tried to validate that, Ben. I couldn't really. I mean, it's a fine theory, but then also vegetables also seem to have quite a lot of microplastics. It really surprised me. Tofu has a lot of microplastics. Again, relatively processed food. Oh yeah, one thing I did forget was that definitely avoid processed food. We keep saying this in various contexts for various reasons, but then the more processed a food item is, the more likely it's to have, you know, much more microplastics. Like chicken nuggets apparently have like 10-20 times microplastics as, you know, regular chicken.
And is that because there are plastics that are being used all along the assembly line that are releasing little bits of themselves, like little
almost certainly it partially might be also the quality of the food ingredients that they're using, but really, like, I think yes, I think the industrial process of processing food just like keeps adding plastics to it.
Yeah. Well, now, so it's interesting because going and visiting you at home, you're saying, don't eat processed food, and yet you've got a cupboard full of processed food now that support your diet, right? You're taking supplements, right? Those are a way of processed food. You're taking protein, whey protein. I mean, whey protein doesn't exist in nature in a powdered form, right? That's highly processed. Chicken chips that you eat, which I love. They're chips made just out of chicken that Dylan eats. That's highly processed. So are you getting rid of all of those?
You know, really great questions. I was trying to find out the whey protein case, at least, like if there are brands of whey protein that are potentially better on this factor. I like part of the problem is that a lot of this food has not even been evaluated, right? And these studies are just happening, so we actually don't even know. But chances are, I think you're right. I think whey protein is probably something that, you know, one should not consume too much, and I should really think about certain processed foods that I eat as well. I do love, to your point, there's I try to eat low carb, but then there's a lot of there's a lot of keto foods that you can buy on Amazon that are kind of, you know, even made with good intentions, they are processed in the sense that they go through multiple steps in a food processing chain. Now, you know, certain processed foods are clearly worse than other processed foods, right? For example, if you take oils and if you heat it up to a high temperature, that just like creates bad oils that you should not consume. But then even just the process of processing or like creating a complicated new food item, even if you start with really perfect ingredients, it seemed like might add microplastics to that food item, and therefore it's probably not a good thing to consume. So yeah, I mean, I should really rethink how much I consume of that stuff.
Well, and also every one of those items, right? Almost every one is sitting in plastic, right? You buy whey protein, it's in a plastic container, right? Or a plastic bag. You buy a protein bar. Yeah. That it's wrapped in plastic. And one of the things that they talk about here is that when it's heated, right, that releases it. Now, to me, this is one of the practical things you can do, which is like, do not heat anything
Absolutely.
in plastic because it will then release into it. But we don't know what's happening in the distribution process. There's this
Correct.
enormous supply chain. If it's being transported in a truck and that truck's going through the Midwest in the middle of summer, you have no idea, right? And it could be heated during that time, and then that protein bar that might otherwise be fine now has microplastics put into it
and even
that
oftentimes when you think there's no plastic, for example, a can of soda that you might buy from a grocery store, or say like the leftover food carton that you get from, like, I don't know, like a Chinese restaurant or whatever, these things actually have a coating of plastic on the inside to prevent degradation of like the cardboard or the metal material. So you're really like, when you reheat the food in the container that it comes in through DoorDash or whatever, like even if it's cardboard, it's really plastic. So that's, so not obvious and so crazy, and you should not do that.
Right. And they're putting hot food right into that. So it's are we super screwed here?
This situation is yeah, it's pretty tricky, and the super screwed part is also that Nat Friedman did some testing around certain chemicals that are present in food, and they found like a relatively high concentration of chemicals across a variety of foods, but something that stood out was that when they evaluated food from the 50s or 60s, right? So they could find canned food items. They found these chemicals were present in those food samples as well. So when I saw that, I thought, hey, okay, it's bad to eat these chemicals, but at the same time, like, a whole generation grew up with that stuff, and they seem to be relatively okay, right?
Yeah,
and
except
so
for Alzheimer's and dementia and rates of cancer, and I mean, relatively okay.
Relatively
right?
okay. Yes, those rates are increasing, but like maybe you can mitigate those risks by otherwise having a really healthy lifestyle and so on.
And towards that end, there is some indication, right, that sweating, right, through exercise, through sauna, may help you get rid of some of these microplastics. So once again, I mean, the answer to so many things, including dementia and things like that, is exercise, is sauna, is, maybe we'll get to cold plunges one day.
Yeah.
Where
potentially. I'd love to understand more if exercise actually helps with the microplastics. So the problem with microplastics, as opposed to these forever chemicals, is that the chemicals have been there, and the whole generation grew up with it, and they're like, they seem to be doing okay. But then with microplastics, this is a completely new experiment. One, right? Because the concentrations have been not nearly at the levels that we're exposed to. And then two, it's exponentially increasing, right? And that is, again, like, I cannot even comprehend the idea of like a full size plastic spoon, 7 grams of plastic in floating around in my brain, right? And as that, like, in 20 years, when it's 2 spoons, like, I don't know, what does that mean? Like, and what can I do about it? I have no idea.
I guess you better upload yourself to the internet faster.
maybe that is the solution. So yeah, that is a concerning situation, and I hope people in regulators are going to look at least certain aspects of it. Polythene is the most common plastic that is found in a lot of these things, and maybe we should reduce the consumption or usage of certain plastics at least. And there are multiple startups and companies working on developing microbes that can ingest plastics and essentially create protein as a result, which is also kind of crazy. This is one company, a Finnish company, that found a microbe, and they found the microbe in like typical composters. It's not like some fancy microbe that they invented. And then essentially they turn microplastics into protein powder, and that you can consume, and it's like a pretty healthy, protein powder, and they're selling it in Singapore right now. which is the only jurisdiction where they got approval for it. In any case, so there are technological solutions.
Maybe
Potentially
you
as
can
well.
just ingest that directly, right? I mean, if you had that in
I
your
was thinking the same thing. Yeah,
microbiome, right?
yeah,
Next, we're gonna see Dylan on
yeah.
the all credit card diet, just eating old
Yeah,
plastic.
maybe the crazy solution here is to have some gut bacteria that breaks down microplastics or something like that. Who knows? But yeah, this is definitely a concerning story. Um, all right, should we go on to our next story here?
Yeah.
All right, so next up we have a pretty crazy story um from Australia actually. So this guy, a musician who died in 2021. His name is Alvin Lucier. He's a composer, right? And he passed away. And then what a team of Australian scientists and artists have done is that they took his genetic material and they created some stem cells out of that, and then they turned these stem cells into neurons and essentially grew a tiny little brain using Alvin's material, essentially like kind of like a brain that is genetically identical to what Alvin, the type of brain cells that would have grown in Alvin's body. And then they're using that tiny little brain to generate music. And so TLDR is that it's almost like they resurrected um, Alvin and are able to get him to compose again, from I don't know, beyond death. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and I liked the quote from his daughter Amanda, right? She's like, "This is so my dad, right? Just before he died, he arranged for himself to play forever. He just can't go. He needs to keep playing." And my first thought is, "Oh, this would be so like Dylan." Right? He'd arrange for some of his genetic matter to stick around, right? To keep creating stuff. And
Yeah,
I
I don't
feel
know
like your
if you
kids would
saw
say
the
this
whole
about you.
the whole 23andMe fiasco, and there were like lots of emails going around. People are like, "Oh, you should delete your 23andMe data immediately." I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, publish it on the internet, like like let anyone use it. What's the big deal?"
You don't want to end up with some clone or some super virus that just targets
I mean,
Dylan's.
that'd be interesting at least.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, this is a really interesting situation, um, from a technology point of view and an ethics point of view. And obviously, they did this with Alvin's authorization. He authorized that that this is okay for them to do this. I think before he passed. But yeah, how do you feel about taking someone's genetic material and somewhat resurrecting them to create, say, art or whatever else?
Well, to me, there's this underlying theme in so many of these topics of what does it mean to be conscious? Where is the line between life and not life, conscious and not conscious, human and not human, right? And so do they is this art project alive, right? Like, how would you feel, or how would his daughter feel about, say, pulling the plug on the art project? And if it's not this, right, well, what happens if you added 10 more neurons or 100 more
Right.
neurons
Right.
or 100 million neurons? At some point you go, well, does this have life of its own, right? Just like the brain in the box, we talked about that in some earlier episodes, how scientists now have a brain in the box, and so it can at some point raise ethical concerns of like, well, if this brain in a box is made of real neurons, if you pull the plug, did you just kill something, right?
Yeah.
Does it have rights?
And a
So
related story, yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
A related story to this, Ben, is this news from Google. Actually, they released a new neural net LLM called Dolphin Gemma, and what Dolphin Gemma does is that they train an LLM based on based on years of data that they had collected from dolphins, like just dolphins making noises, and we've for a long time known that dolphins are like one of the most intelligent species in the world. They are able to use tools. They're able to coordinate socially. They're able to essentially use language among themselves, and so on. And the hope with the dolphin gemma model is that we can ideally ultimately translate as dolphins speak to each other to human language and back and forth, and that is pretty remarkable and really cool as well. Being able to communicate with, in one case being able to sort of communicate with someone after they died, and the other case being able to communicate with animals.
Yeah, so I was excited about this news, right? And this actually isn't the only interspecies or even dolphin human communication project, right? A friend of mine, Asa Raskin, is the founder of the Earth Species Project that's doing something similar, and he has a metaphor for it that I really like, where he describes it sort of like modern optics, right? Where just as telescopes showed us how Earth isn't the center of the universe, AI here may reveal that humanity isn't the center of consciousness. And one of the things that he talks about is that when you model languages, you're essentially showing the relationships between words in a language. If you were to put each word as a dot and draw lines between them, you sort of end up with this 3D shape. And it has a particular form. Like if you imagined it could be like a human hand, for example, right? It's not a hand shape, but just as the example.
Sure.
And then if you look at other languages like English to French to Japanese or Chinese or things like that, they all sort of have this similar shape, which is why AI is able to sort of translate with almost perfect accuracy, as we covered in earlier episodes, between different languages. And one of the things that Asa pointed out is when they're modeling whale languages and dolphin languages, they have a similar shape, which that sends chills up and down my spine. I mean, these animals are communicating and the way we are. And so we may be, months or years away from being able to genuinely speak to them.
Yeah. Also, how did Douglas Adams figure out all of this stuff in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where he says the dolphins leave us a message, saying thank you, so long, and thank you for all the fish at the end of the world. I wonder if that's what we hear when we activate Dolphin Gemma and are able to translate.
Well, I mean, there was a report about this where, so like right now we're able to figure out some of their words and then play things back to them. And recently scientists were doing this. They had recorded a whale and they were playing the whale sound back. And the whale sort of, the whale said a thing and then they said the same thing back. And then the whale came over and they said something, the whale said a thing. And then the whale got really upset.
Oh, really?
And
I didn't read that.
Went
part.
after
That's
the boat,
wild.
and they figured out later that what they were doing was the whale was introducing itself. It was like going, "Hey, I'm Ben," and then they were like, "Hey, I'm Ben," and then he's like, "No, I'm Ben," and they're like,
"Oh my god!"
And so they were pissing him off, right? So right now we're at the, it's like a child learning how to say stuff. That's where we are.
Yeah.
But one of the things Asa also talks about that I think is so exciting is that we have a species that, unlike ourselves, who are hundreds of thousands of years old, these species are millions of years old. So there could be a knowledge and wisdom that has been passed down for up to 34 million years, right? That we could learn something about, which is sort of a fascinating idea. I mean, again, I don't know what they're going to say. Maybe, hey, you guys need to get off Twitter, or I don't know.
That is a totally new thought. It hadn't even occurred to me. That's a really interesting way to think about it. On one hand, right, like the dinosaurs existed for like some I don't know, 23 million, some number of millions of years, and it didn't seem like they made it out of that sort of like a more primitive uh, stage, and yet to your point, a species that has existed for like, I don't know, 10 15 millions of millions on the planet, they might have a form of, even if it's not like, obviously it's not going to be like factual knowledge, right? It's not going to be like dolphins are going to tell us one day like what meaning of life is about or something like that, but there might be some deeper wisdom that is encoded, and that would be really interesting to figure out.
Well, let me just challenge that for a moment, right? I think we have an idea that we have this lock on consciousness, right? That we're the highest form of consciousness on the planet, right? But a couple things. One is, and maybe I should have looked this up. It didn't occur to me right now, but maybe you could look this up on like how many billions of neurons are in a dolphin brain or a whale brain. Because if there's some relationship between number of neurons or complexity, and they have more, they might actually have a more evolved level of consciousness. That's number one. And number two is like, yes, we've evolved to proliferate around the globe, and technology has advanced and things like that. And we may use this as a sign that we're a higher consciousness. And yet, when you look at those folks who sort of have evolved, right? The yogis, the Buddhists and meditators, all of this, they tend to live in harmony with the people and the world around them, right? And there isn't this consumptive or destructive force that's running unbounded in the way that it is for humans. So just to challenge that for a moment, maybe they are our consciousness elders, so to speak, because they figured out how to live for 34 million years without destroying the environment and all the species around them.
Yeah, no, I think that is interesting to think about. To answer your question, seem like dolphins have about 37 billion neurons, as opposed to human brains that have about 86 billion neurons. So it's really not that far off.
Yeah. And so more matter, more physical matter, but less
right. But then with whales it's 200 billion, and then with elephants it's 257 billion neurons. So that's really interesting. And but then cortical neurons are humans have like the highest, apparently about 16 billion cortical neurons, and all these other animals less. I mean, the number of neurons is definitely a decent proxy for something, right? Like it's at least processing power. But I think
word of the week. It's
so one of the greatest mysteries in evolution, and we think we have a decent idea, but we don't know for sure, is why the human brain evolved. This is actually one of the most profound lessons in my life, not just because of the scientific relevance of this, but also like kind of how to live life in general, and how to shape my own outlook, which is the question: why do we have such a big brain, right? And before evolution was discovered by Darwin, we thought that maybe we evolved bigger brains for things like using tools and like to become smarter, so that we can survive collectively better as a species. But because of sort of like the Mendelian math, right, like the natural selection process, how it works, turns out that is a completely false assumption, because any change that in your DNA that leads to a better fit for the environment, the fit function rewards you, right? If you're a better fit for the environment, rewards you by being able to allowing you to have more offspring, right? And for that mechanism to work, whatever that reason needs to give a single individual an upper hand by having that mutation, right? So in other words, like a mutation can only happen in evolution if one individual carrying that mutation has an advantage over everyone else in your own species, right? So that you can have more offspring. And when you apply this logic to the tool use, it falls apart, because if someone invents a tool, then everyone else in the tribe can also use that tool. So it's actually not that useful for the individual. Our best guess, though, for this is one of my favorite kind of scientific theories, and very well explained in the book Elephant in the Brain, which is that the mutation that we got into an interspecies competition over was the ability to politicize, right? Essentially, convince your peer that you're superior, right? And this has been shown there's a lot of evidence in apes and chimpanzees, how they're much more political than other animals. Sometimes the alpha male is not the strongest one, but the one that is able to trick other alphas into collaborating with you or working with you, or even getting them to fear you irrationally, right? And so what likely happened was that humanity, or humans as a species, got into an interspecies competition in being able to essentially one up each other, right, and judge each other, and kind of be strategic and political with each other, and so on. So
right, and
this is like a really profound.
To me, what's interesting here, right, about this theory is that in order for the brain to grow so rapidly in complexity, because that's the other thing that you didn't mention here, is that hundreds of millions of years of evolution, right? Dinosaurs were around for hundreds of millions of years. It seems like they didn't have particularly large brains, and then we come along, and suddenly there's this sort of like crazy exponential growth in an extremely short period of time that needs an explanation that fits with evolution, right? The only environmental changes happen very, very slowly. So you need an environmental change that happens exponentially, and the only reasonable explanation is increasing social complexity, right? So people get bigger brains, the interpersonal dynamics grow in complexity, so then they need bigger brains, and then boom, you're
not only that, especially given the total cost of carrying this bigger brain around, right? It's like it consumes 20% of your total energy, and that's extremely costly. So it has to give you an advantage that completely outweighs the cost of the cost of energy, but also like the fact that you have to have like very elongated or extended childhoods, where human children are not able to survive in the wild, and they have to be taken care of for like years and years. And so so we have to have a reason that basically like outdoes all of those downsides.
Right. Well, okay, so then applying it to elephants, they've got 200 billion neurons. Do they have a lot higher complexity in their social?
I don't know. It's unlikely that is the reason why elephants have so many neurons. It probably has to do with, I think,
there is some relationship
with
size.
Have like three different brains and all these things. So it's like they're different. I guess the point that I was trying to make is that there are different reasons why certain species have accumulated higher numbers of neurons. In the case of humans, the reason for having a larger brain seemed to be that we got into an intraspecies runaway competition to become better at tricking each other, to being more political with each other, to being more and more kind of able to manipulate each other, and so on. And some of the downsides of sort of human society, human existence, almost certainly is tied to those same evolutionary reasons, right? So something I try to remind myself oftentimes, when oftentimes people say no one's perfect, right? And like everyone's got a fault or whatever. And I like to turn this around and then kind of like, I think the inverse is the truth, which is that it's not that everyone's flawed or no one's perfect. It's just that each one of us has a biological need to see no one else as perfect. Because that is literally why our brain evolved. Our brain evolved to see everyone else as like somewhat imperfect compared to us, and then they could do this one thing wrong, better or more right, and so on, right? So it's like this idea of judgment is really biologically evolutionary encoded in our brain, so that we can become better at becoming more political, right? Because if there's something wrong with one person, you can use that fact to mobilize everyone else against that person, right? And
Okay, wait.
and
So this is crazy. So let me play back what I'm hearing you say.
yeah,
So you have a theory that the reason that we see others as flaws or look for flaws is a biological advantage.
absolutely.
That if I can identify a flaw in others, then I can use it for my own political / social gain, which would then allow me to procreate more.
Correct. 100%. And
Okay.
and 8 billion of us are walking around day to day, essentially, carrying this flaw detection machine around.
Right.
Like that's what the brain evolved to do.
Right. Now, and we can also apply it to ourselves, right? Because
Absolutely.
you want to
Yeah.
recognize, is there a flaw?
Yeah.
I mean, just to go with this, in myself that others could capitalize on,
Yeah.
right? And if I can recognize in myself first, I can make the error correction and then
Well,
not.
sort of. It actually doesn't even matter, right? So these are like slightly two different concepts, right? Like, so the point I'm making is that no matter how good or how perfect an individual tries to be, it actually doesn't matter, because every other individual, every other human is designed to see a flaw in every single person that they know, right? This is why, like, we see the most flaws sometimes in the people we love the most, and we can't stop judging them sometimes, right? And I think it's really helpful to know this. It's really helpful that your brain evolved over millions of years to its current size, to essentially for the sole purpose almost of seeing flaws in others, right? And once you know this, you can step away from this idea that, oh, like, this person is not perfect, that person is not perfect. That's a fucking meaningless thing to say, right? There's no such thing as perfect. And now it sounds like kind of like some trite wisdom, but I think it's important to appreciate the science behind it, the biology behind it, that we're so hardwired to judge others. We're so hardwired to see flaws in others.
Is this a Dylan original idea?
I mean, I think the science is there. I mean, the idea did occur to me, but yeah.
Okay, but it wasn't in one of the
No,
selfless
I haven't
gene or the
read
elephant in
anywhere.
the brain.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
cool. I all right. I like that there's an evolutionary reason behind judgment, self and others, and that makes sense to me. Now, to me, there's a second fascinating thing here that I'm interested to watch how this sort of plays out, right? Because there's a notion we like to anthropomorphize our pets, right? Oh, my dog's happy, it's sad, it has these feelings that are very human-like, right? But we don't give animals the same rights that we give ourselves. But I really wonder, is this going to change, right? I mean, if we look at where this is going, right? We've got as of a few weeks ago, a tool that can translate between human languages almost perfectly for very, very cheap. I could see in 5 years we have the same thing, and now you can listen to what your cat says or your dog says, or that dolphin that you see jumping in the ocean, or the whale or the cow or the pig or the chicken that we eat. And I think it's just going to be totally fascinating what's going to happen as we learn to communicate with these other species, right? Like on the one hand, once we can communicate with them, is there going to be some big awakening that we need to hold life as equal and sacred, sort of the way,
That's a good point.
the Jain religion do? Or are we going to get the mirror directly in our face where we acknowledge that we really don't hold all life as equal or sacred, that there's this spectrum, and our people are going to go, well, yeah, even though I now have the translator and the deer can speak to me and it's going like, please stop chasing me, I'm still going to chase this deer and shoot it and put it on my wall.
Yeah. As a fascinating question that you're asking, I'm really curious about the answer. In general, I think people have only become more compassionate towards all suffering, right? We didn't used to see other humans as equal, right? Like you just, any new tribe that you discover, you used to see them as less than human, and we don't do that anymore. And it is due to growing, a more evolved shared understanding of the state of consciousness. So I think I don't know. My guess would be that we'll all be vegetarians at some point, but who knows?
How would you respond to someone who challenged your notion that we're becoming more compassionate, where they go, well, look at the war in Ukraine, or all these holy wars, or what's happening with Israel and Palestine right now? I mean, people who are dying, they all speak languages. We can translate all the languages. They are humans. They're not a lesser species.
I mean, that one's really easy, right? All you gotta show them is like a plot of violent deaths per 100 people, like, which is probably like dropped dramatically over time. So if you just look at the raw numbers, and there are fewer violence, fewer crime, and fewer wars overall, less and less suffering
per capita. Yeah. Right. And this, to me, this is the thing that I feel so frustrated about with the media, right? Is that we talk about absolute numbers and we're not talking about relative numbers.
Absolutely.
Right. And so we can't actually, our brains aren't designed to understand things at scale, to realize that, for example, it is so much safer to be a human today than it was in 1950s, where people have a nostalgia for how safe it is. And I have this debate with my mom all the time. I'm like, she didn't feel safe to turn me loose on the streets as a kid. She's like, oh, it wasn't like how I grew up in Philadelphia. We grew up in San Francisco. And I'm like, no, Mom, when you look at the data, I was way less likely to be kidnapped, way less likely to be shot or stabbed. Right. Your mind is being influenced by the media here.
Absolutely. And this is one of the primary reasons why we want to start this podcast, right, Ben? To point this out, that you're practically living much more like what the ancients thought of as a god than like really even a mere mortal at this point, across every single dimension, except that microplastics for your brain. Well, I'm a god with a fucking spoon stuck in my head.
Yeah. It could. I don't think you should limit yourself, Dylan. It doesn't have to be a spoon. It could be a fork, right?
It's true. Yeah.
Right. It could be it could be a figurine, maybe.
On that note, let's wrap this up. This is a really fun conversation. But before we wrap up, I want to talk about our hack of the week. I actually have a really fun one this week, which we can try out in real time, Ben.
All right. And I don't know what this is, so I'm looking forward to the surprise.
Yeah. So this is something that you can do with ChatGPT, actually. So ChatGPT released an update relatively recently where it basically has memory or contextual awareness of all the chats you have entered into ChatGPT historically, right? And so now what you can do is, Ben, if you can open ChatGPT, and I use the 4.5 version for this, you can type, now that you can remember everything I've ever typed here, point out my top 5 blind spots. Got it?
All right. I've entered that.
Yeah. Okay. So, now that you can remember everything I've typed here, point out my top 5 blind spots. And what came out for me was really interesting and much more perceptive than I would have guessed. So my top 5 blind spots are: I'll go through them. One, over optimization of risk. You frequently pursue the most optimized, streamlined, high efficiency solutions, etc. It's like, it's risky. And the second one is data-driven certainty bias. Relying too much on data, apparently. Third one is technological solutionism. Seeing technology as a solution to everything. And then fourth one is it's really, really bright. Is assumption of universal transferability, meaning that when there's a solution in one part of one culture or whatever, that can be transferred to any other culture, which is I'm definitely guilty of. And then the fifth one is long-term philosophical confidence. So, any interesting findings on your end?
Which means what? Long-term philosophical confidence.
So you engage with deeply speculative philosophical and theoretical ideas, particularly regarding consciousness, rebirth, quantum mechanics, and transhumanism, often seeking logical consistency and scientific plausibility. Blind spot is that your thorough pursuit of logical coherence can occasionally overshadow the inherent unpredictability, unknowability, and complexity, and so on.
I agree with that so much. All right. Mine, number one, hypercompetence equals isolation trap, right?
Okay.
You operate at a very high level intellectually, strategically, and emotionally, but that rare air can become isolating. So you underestimate how much others want or need to contribute. And I take on over responsibility and I under trust others' capacity. Number two, that emotional precision is not equal to emotional transparency. You have elite level self-awareness and you phrase things with scalpel level nuance, but that precision may mask vulnerability or raw truth.
I think that's actually true for you.
Yeah. I intellectualize pain, love, and grief and conflict as a way to stay in control. And I should have the opportunity to let messiness surface sooner. Velocity, bias, and execution. You move quickly, synthesize faster, but speed can outpace alignment, especially with in partnerships or with neurodiverse collaborators. And I don't calibrate to how long it takes others to metabolize ideas emotionally. That makes this all makes a lot of sense. Let's see, boundary drift in high stakes relationships. I'm generous and intense, and I delay necessary conflict. Instead of getting clear on non-negotiables up front. What do you agree with that one?
I think they're all pretty accurate. This
last one is titled Master Strategist, Apprentice Griever.
What?
You're a systems thinker, fixer, and builder, but loss, ambiguity, and emotional whiplash doesn't respond to strategy. And you may try to solve feelings that just need to be felt.
Interesting.
One last thing. Thank you. That is fun and illuminating.
Right? It's pretty remarkable. And ChatGPT is going to be the best therapist out there very soon. You could also try, now you can remember everything I've ever typed. Here, I guess my IQ. That was also interesting. But
what did you get?
I got 135 to 140. So I don't know. Probably that's
you don't want to type that in.
Yeah. So that's all for today, folks. You should all do that and let us know what you find.
All right, and subscribe.
Subscribe on YouTube. Hit that button and help us spread the word and let us know what's going well and what we could do better and so on. And see you next week.